I froze mid-step, the words slicing through the air like a knife. Your sister? She doesn't deserve a dime. She's done. My father's voice, sharp and final, bounced off the walls of the living room. I glanced at my mother. She wasn't shocked. She smiled. A smile so calm, so satisfied it made my blood run cold. The betrayal hit me harder than anything before. My own parents, whispering about me behind closed doors as if I were a stranger, as if everything I'd worked for, every ounce of loyalty I'd given meant nothing. I walked away, heart pounding, the taste of anger and disbelief bitter on my tongue. That night I moved every dollar I owned out of the accounts they thought I couldn't touch. Not because I was afraid, but because I had learned early. The people closest to you can be the most dangerous. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Like the people who were supposed to love you most had already decided your place in the world. At the bottom, powerless, expendable? I lit a cigarette on the balcony. The city skyline sprawled beneath me like a living reminder of freedom they'd never take from me. The cool night air burned my lungs, but I welcomed it. Each inhale was a promise. I wouldn't let them write my ending. Not tonight. Not ever. By dawn I had a plan forming, threads connecting in ways only I could see. Every alliance, every loyalty they had counted on, would shift under their feet. The people who believed in my downfall. They would learn the hard way that misjudging me was the biggest mistake of their lives. And while they slept, dreaming of my ruin, I thrived in the shadows, plotting, calculating. I had been underestimated, dismissed, told I didn't matter. They had lit the fire. Now I would become it. The city lights glimmered, indifferent, as if to remind me that the world moves on, with or without justice. But in that stillness I felt power awaken. Not revenge yet, not fully, but the first whisper of it. Because some betrayals aren't just wounds, they're opportunities. And I was ready. By the second morning, my world had shifted. The money was gone from their reach, tucked away in accounts only I controlled. But financial independence was just the first move. The real game was psychological, turning the tables, showing them that betrayal cuts both ways. I watched my brother that afternoon. He didn't know I had moved the funds. He thought he had power, that he could rely on my parents' judgment against me. But ignorance is a dangerous illusion. Every smile he gave at the dinner table, every nod of approval to their decisions, was another thread I intended to pull. My parents, oblivious, continued their quiet manipulation. My mother's smile haunted me. Calm, calculating, convinced she had orchestrated the perfect family hierarchy. They believed they had stripped me of control, that I would scramble, plead, beg, or cry. They were wrong. I started documenting everything. Their words, their plans, every slip of arrogance, every misstep. I knew the value of evidence. Knowledge isn't power until it becomes leverage. By nightfall I had a folder thick with truths they'd buried, unaware I had been watching, listening, remembering. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever realized that betrayal isn't always loud? Sometimes it's quiet, whispered behind closed doors, and the only way to fight it is with patience, cunning, and precision? The next day I sent a subtle message to my father's closest business partner. Nothing obvious. Just a question hinting at mismanagement in the family accounts. A seed of doubt, small but potent. By the time he called my father for clarification, I knew the panic would ripple. I didn't need to confront him directly. Chaos has a way of working itself out when the right pieces are nudged. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out over the city. Manhattan glimmered, indifferent, but beneath the glitter my storm was brewing. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that because I was family I was predictable, controllable, replaceable. They were wrong. Every word, every move they made against me had only sharpened my focus, my strategy, my resolve. And in that darkness I realized, revenge isn't about rage, it's about inevitability. Patience is its own kind of power. The first threads had been pulled. The first cracks had begun to form. And when the full storm came, they wouldn't know what hit them. By the third day, subtle chaos had begun to ripple through the house. My brother frowned at the silence on his accounts. double-checked his statements, his confidence wavering. My father paced the office, muttering to himself about discrepancies that didn't exist, at least not in his reality. I had planted the first seeds of doubt, and they were sprouting faster than I expected. I watched from a distance as my mother's calm facade slipped just slightly. The corner of her mouth twitched in frustration when an unexpected phone call rattled her schedule. Even she, the orchestrator, hadn't seen this coming. The power she believed she wielded over me had evaporated in the hours I had quietly claimed my freedom. I began leveraging what I had collected: documents, whispers, small truths that could unravel their control without me ever confronting them directly. Every call I made, every subtle hint I dropped into the right ears, created tension, suspicion, and fear. I didn't need loud confrontation. I needed patience, precision, and inevitability. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever realized that the people who think they have the upper hand are the easiest to manipulate when you know their weaknesses? That night, I slipped into the shadows of my father's world, unseen but omnipresent. Every conversation I overheard, every gesture I noticed, I catalogued. He had assumed he could isolate me from influence, make me powerless. But he hadn't accounted for foresight, or my willingness to wait for the right moment. By the next morning, my father had begun questioning his closest advisors. My mother, the so-called master of calm, was now constantly checking her phone, jittery and unsettled. My brother, clueless, still believed he was a spectator in this silent war. And yet I didn't act recklessly. I didn't gloat. This was no impulsive retaliation, it was strategic. I let them flounder in their ignorance, each of their missteps feeding the momentum I had set in motion. The family they thought untouchable? It was a house of cards, and I was holding the slightest of breezes. As the city lights glimmered below, I realized something important. Betrayal doesn't just wound, it teaches. It teaches you patience, cunning, and the subtle art of inevitability. And I was learning fast. By the time they recognized the first signs of instability, it would be too late. By the fourth day, tension had become almost tangible. My father barked orders at his team, his calm authority cracking under the pressure of questions he hadn't anticipated. The discrepancies I'd subtly introduced had spread like wildfire through his business network, raising eyebrows, suspicions, and doubt. My mother, the master planner, was no longer untouchable. Her smile had faded, replaced with thin lips pressed tight, eyes scanning every message, every call, desperate to maintain control she no longer had. I watched from a distance, heart steady, knowing I didn't need to intervene. The storm I'd set in motion was doing its work. My brother called me that evening, voice strained. "Hannah, what's happening? Did you?" He didn't finish because he didn't know. He had been blind, loyal to the wrong side, believing in the family hierarchy that had always favored him. But the structure was collapsing. Every ally they thought loyal was now questioning, and I had been the catalyst. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever realized that sometimes the people closest to you can be your greatest enemies, and that the only way to survive is to embrace strategy over emotion? By nightfall, I had compiled more evidence, more subtle triggers, and positioned them like dominoes across every aspect of their lives. Bank statements, business contracts, financial records, they all painted a picture of fragility my parents had never imagined existed. And yet, I didn't reveal a single word. I didn't need to. Fear and doubt were now quietly devouring them from the inside. Later, I overheard my mother whisper to herself in the kitchen, a confession only she knew. Maybe I underestimated her. She didn't know the half of it. I had anticipated every move, every reaction, every attempt to salvage control. By the time they realized, the damage would be irreversible. I poured a glass of wine and gazed at the city below, lights twinkling like witnesses to a quiet war. Manhattan didn't care about family betrayal, and neither did I. All that mattered was inevitability. By the end of the night, the first cracks in their perfect facade had become obvious to anyone paying attention. Whispers, uneasy glances, unreturned calls. They couldn't hide it anymore. And all I had done was watch, wait, and guide. Some people think revenge is loud, dramatic, explosive. But true revenge is quiet, surgical, and unavoidable. And the full reckoning was just beginning. By the fifth day, the cracks were no longer subtle. They were glaring. My father's meetings were tense, with questions he couldn't answer, while whispers of mismanagement swirled around him like smoke. Every glance from his advisors carried suspicion. Every hesitant nod was a warning. He was unraveling in real time, and I hadn't even touched the core of my plan yet. My mother, who had always seemed untouchable, now paced her kitchen, phone clutched in trembling hands. Each message, each call fed her growing anxiety. She had orchestrated so many family moves with precision, thinking she was untouchable, but her empire of influence was collapsing quietly, methodically. My brother, poor, unsuspecting, loyal to the wrong people brother, had begun to falter. A bank call, a missed payment alert, a quiet conversation overheard in the house. Each one chipped away at his confidence. He had always assumed I would be powerless or desperate or sentimental. But I was none of those things. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever realized that the people you trusted most, the ones who smiled at you every day, could crumble so completely when confronted with truth and inevitability? By nightfall, I had set the final dominoes in motion for this phase. Anonymous tips to business partners, subtle reminders to family friends, leaks to financial advisors. They were all calculated, all precise. I didn't shout. I didn't confront. I simply let their world collapse under the weight of their own errors, amplified by the evidence I had quietly collected. That evening, I received a text from my brother. Hannah, what's happening? Everything is falling apart. How? I smiled, swirling my wine, and didn't respond. There was no need. He would see soon enough. He would understand the magnitude of what had been set in motion and realize that loyalty to the wrong side always comes with consequences. And then there was my mother, who had always smiled through betrayal, confident she could control outcomes. I imagined her staring at the empty dinner chairs, wondering where her power had gone. She had never counted on patience, precision, or inevitability. The city outside glittered with indifferent brilliance, unaware of the personal storm raging inside the family walls. But I was aware. I had become the calm in the storm, the quiet force that turned betrayal into balance, manipulation into justice. By the end of the night, the first undeniable signs of collapse were visible to anyone who cared to look. And all I had done was watch, wait, and allow inevitability to do its work. By the sixth day, the walls they had built around themselves were starting to crumble. My father, once so confident, could barely hide the panic in his eyes during a phone call with a major client. Every question he stumbled over, every hesitant pause, chipped away at the empire he thought was untouchable. My mother, the one who smiled through every betrayal, was no longer smiling. I imagined her pacing the penthouse, phone in hand, trying to salvage the chaos she had ignored brewing under her own roof. Every ally she had counted on had begun to doubt her judgment, and she had no idea why. Even my brother, so sure of his own power, was trembling. A single bank inquiry, a quiet conversation in the house, a suspicious email, all small, but together they created a panic he couldn't escape. He had always assumed I was powerless. He had been wrong. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever watched someone you thought invincible panic and flounder, realizing that everything they had counted on, their money, their influence, their allies, was slipping away and there was nothing left to hold on to? I had orchestrated each domino with careful precision. Subtle tips to their advisors, whispers to family friends, small but undeniable leaks of truth to the people who mattered. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need chaos. The storm was already inside them, invisible but unstoppable. That night, I received a photo from my brother's office. Him sitting alone, head in hands, surrounded by financial statements he didn't understand and decisions he couldn't fix. My mother's expression in the background of the shot was priceless. Panic masked behind a thin veil of composure. They didn't know that the real power had quietly shifted. I poured myself a glass of wine, staring at the city lights. Manhattan glittered, indifferent, oblivious to the collapse unfolding within one family. But I was aware. Every whisper, Every hesitation, every shaky step of theirs had been guided by me. I had taken the betrayal they inflicted on me and transformed it into inevitability. By the end of the night, there was no hiding from the truth. Their carefully curated lives were unraveling. The illusion of control was gone, replaced by chaos of their own making. And I was calm, steady, untouched, watching them finally face the consequences they had ignored for too long. The storm had reached its peak. Only the final act remained. By the seventh day, the full weight of their misjudgment was crashing down. My father, once proud and commanding, now stammered through calls and meetings. Advisors questioned him openly, clients demanded explanations, and every carefully crafted illusion of control dissolved before his eyes. The man who had thought he could dictate my life now struggled to dictate his own. My mother, the one who had smiled through manipulation and betrayal, was on edge, obsessively checking every email, every message, every shadow of a rumor. She had underestimated me. Her calm control had never been tested against precision, patience, and inevitability, and now she was unraveling in real time. My brother, once arrogant and confident, was panic-stricken. Calls went unanswered, accounts questioned, whispers reaching ears that had previously praised him. He had assumed I would remain powerless, that I would remain obedient. He hadn't counted on foresight or persistence, or the quiet ferocity of someone pushed too far. My name is Hannah Parker. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever seen the people who think they are untouchable crumble silently, clawing for control that no longer exists, realizing too late that they set themselves up for this? That night, my family's empire, their reputation, their influence, their perceived untouchability, was teetering. Panic was evident in every message, every glance, every whispered word behind closed doors. Yet I did nothing but observe, letting the weight of inevitability do the work I had meticulously planned. I imagined them in the living room, my father gripping the edge of the table, my mother frozen with disbelief, my brother pacing in vain. They had demanded control over me, dismissed me, underestimated me. And now they were powerless. The city outside glittered with indifferent brilliance, completely unaware of the quiet storm that had consumed one family. And I stood apart, calm, collected, fully aware that every move, every hesitation, every faltering heartbeat had been orchestrated without confrontation, without rage. By the end of the night, there was no denying the collapse. The foundation they had relied on for decades was gone, and I had been the quiet architect of its demise. I hadn't struck them. I hadn't yelled. I had merely been patient, precise, and relentless. The final act was within reach. The reckoning was complete.